Hello, everyone. Really nice to meet you today. Uh, it's a really great opportunity for a post-lockdown reflection in an ESG context with respect to the trends in transport and logistics. We've been analyzing trends before the pandemic, and then the pandemic struck. Some things changed, some things didn't change. I hope this is really post-lockdown, so we're not headed towards another lockdown in the near future. I'm part of the wider global PwC team supporting transport and logistics in the Central Eastern Europe region. And the reason for which transport is important also in sustainability perspective, it's not just because it generates about 5% of, for example, European Union's GDP, but if we look at the contribution of transport to greenhouse gas emissions, first of all, it's more than a quarter. And second of all, it's not really been changing. This data is being updated, exposed, but I also know that we didn't really have any breakthrough developments with respect to reducing transport emissions in Europe recently. So we can expect similar numbers for 2019, 2020, which is a little bit saddening. Transport is also very dynamically changing. In our global survey, transport and logistics CEOs mentioned that two-thirds of them expect that changes in the core technologies of how they provide services will be disruptive to their businesses. We also see a large gap in workforce. We see cost of transport growing. We see regulational changes. So this led us to thinking about what's happening overall and what are the main trends. The five main trends we identified 2 years ago: that's digitalization, shifts in international trade, software-driven process changes, changes in domestic commerce, and machine-driven process changes. We see that digitalization has gained pace since 2 3 years. It is very important to remember that digitalization in transport is something completely different than what we may have seen in the manufacturing industry over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, mostly because the transport sector is really diverse. There are completely different transport companies doing completely different modes of transport, and they require completely different types of digitalizations. We see shifts in international trade being accelerated by pandemic and the lockdowns. With respect to software-driven process changes and machine-driven process changes, we see a rising demand. So, for example, if we look at manufacturers of the most common optimization for last mile delivery in courier services, and this is parcel lockers, that most of the parcel locker producers that we know already have a really big backlog of orders for their machinery exceeding a year, or sometimes in some cases even more. Overall, those five forces were driven by a number of trends, starting from changes in consumer behaviors, talent supply gaps, availability of technology through regulations, ESG, growth in international trade, and then, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is speeding up the trade between China and the rest of the world. I shouldn't say China in any specific country or union or continent, since it's a, let's say, overarching initiative. There is also this rapid development of technologies, base technologies, which enable providing solutions. I'm pretty sure that the geo people we have today on call will know more than me on these topics, but we also need to remember that technology is driven by a need, so there is a pressure on business effectiveness. With respect to the shifts in markets domestic commerce, we see growing staff costs, labor gap, changing consumer behaviors as noted earlier, but also maturing e-commerce across some of the geographies, and overall growing transport volumes. There was a lot of uncertainty last year with respect to what would happen, but we are seeing in a lot of economies that transport is actually doing quite good, and the volumes are either bouncing back or actually exceeding what they reached in previous years. With respect to what's changed due to COVID, so digitalization has definitely been accelerated. Shifts in international trade, we're seeing that due to the lockdowns and the disruptions in supply chains, the evergreen container ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, and the global container crisis, there is a trend for moving towards more local supply chains. So moving warehousing delivery closer to consumers. Um, I'm not sure if you've already started thinking about presents for the end of the year. Whoever is up to that, I would definitely recommend thinking about this earlier than later, since we're already seeing and experiencing supply chain gaps touching different companies and big international brands preparing specific plans to make sure that they actually can meet the demand. Now, there is, of course, the acceleration of robotization of processes, of more advanced software solutions being applied to processes. We're also um, seeing divergence inside of the economy. So some of the flows in transport have boomed, like e-commerce generated courier parcel volumes. Then there were drops in automotive. Automotive is also struggling with the shortage of semiconductors, which is further impacting the results of logistics companies which support the automotive industry. Now, with respect to how these different trends can be viewed from a technological perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we always need to start with a need. So we need to understand what we're optimizing, what we're digitizing, and there are a number of areas that can be improved thanks to digitalization, thanks to technologies that companies are already working on, from operations through planning, management, customer service, administrations. These are just examples for road transport. I guess we could make a similar different list for rail, for sea and inland, for air. We need to remember that each of the industries has, or sub-industries of transports, the modes of transports, has its own rules and its own needs. So we're also seeing this specialization of different types of software um, being adjusted to very specific sub-industries. And even if we look at, let's say, the array of examples of different applications of such solutions, currently it's vast. There's an abundance of tools. There's a lot of M&A activity between technological companies, which we also have been supporting with respect to digitalizations for transport companies. Again, here's some examples for the road sector. I guess we should definitely also mention TomTom, whose representatives we also have with us on the call today, who's going to be presenting what they do here. We've got some other examples, but the most important thing is about from A to Z, every single example of these digitalizations solves a different problem and serves a different purpose. And this is what we're also seeing. So there's a challenge that transport companies are facing with answering the question, all right, so which digitalizations should we start with? Should we go for more robust solutions, or should we pick something that's going to be best for us? With respect to what's changing in international trade, I think the best visualization and example is the number of train trips happening between EU and China, and it's grown from 17 in 2011 to 12,400 in 2020. with respect to what's being reported by the Chinese railway authority. There are investments happening all across the corridors of the New Silk Road here. Just some examples. And then when we move further to examples of solutions, so on the software side, intelligent transportation systems being developed and integrated, not just across the modes of transport, but also allowing further integration between transport vessels and infrastructure, robotic process automation, predictive maintenance, drone supervision. So one of the questions asked today was, what's the role of drones in transport? It's not just about maintenance supervision. There are multiple applications, emissions measurement, supervision for delivery, stock taking inside of warehouses, last mile, just to mention a few. We have been working recently with a company which is looking at drone delivery on last mile, on short distances, for example. So we also know that usually these solutions are quite specific and quite adjusted to the very needs of a very specific company. With respect to what's happening in domestic setups, first of all, we're seeing that the share of e-commerce in total retail sales has really grown. In 2020, it has reached 18%, which is actually meeting the assumptions and expectations for this growth. We're seeing that big businesses are entering e-commerce. E-commerce is investing in logistics. There are new courier solutions for e-commerce. So there's this big development of the out-of-home OOH channel of delivery with pickup points and with parcel lockers. And this is actually quite important because one of the intrinsic and interesting changes in the industry for couriers, for example, that is that in some cases, couriers no longer compete with other couriers. They start competing with big sales platforms. And thinking about the future, it is really interesting to see how this puzzle is going to evolve. We also see that this puzzle is evolving differently in very different markets. So there are markets in which where there's this vertical, let's say, integration between e-commerce platforms and couriers, while in other markets there are some, let's say, small alliances. This is usually very country specific. And last but not least, machine-driven process changes. So a lot of warehousing robotization, not just with respect to automatic storage, automatic warehousing, automatic picking in downstream distribution in the retail segments, but also with respect to what the courier companies are doing, electromobility and alternative fuels, last mile optimization, autonomous transport. When thinking about autonomous transport, we also need to remember that it's not just those big trucks on the roads, it's also internal transport inside of companies that is becoming autonomous, in some cases even faster, quicker than what we've seen on the roads. Just even 2 months ago, we were together with our team reviewing a warehouse in which a company is applying Shepherd robots to move pallet jacks around the warehouse. It's also a very interesting process setup, but it also involves autonomous movement of some equipment moving goods inside of a space. So the overall question is that first of all, well, if transport and logistics will keep evolving in the near future, how are we embracing these changes? How are we thinking about to what extent we can actually integrate with providers of this multitude of solutions? And I think that one of the most important thing is actually about starting from the needs of the industry and looking for very specific niches that can be filled through services and through the types of solutions that we offer. That's it from my end. I'm happy to take a few questions